Welcome to Press Coverage. I'm Theo Greminger. At Press Coverage, I'm trying to find you the edges you need to win in fantasy. I'm trying to bring on the sharpest guests possible. And today, I'm happy to be joined by one of the foremost experts when it comes to the NFL draft and to all things prospect related, Brett Whitefield of Fantasy Points. You've seen Brett on Dynasty Life. You've seen Brett on Press Coverage. It is the season for this sort of guest because we're deep into rookie season, 98 days away from round one of the NFL draft, 11 days away from the Senior Bowl. This is an exciting draft class. Brett, how are you doing today?
Dude, I get to do a show with you. I'm good. You are by far my favorite guest spots to do is on your shows, man. So thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. Yeah, and you're always welcome here. I told Scott Barrett this story. I'm in the Fantasy Football Expo in Canton, Ohio, and I had two guys come over and they're like, Theo, we love your shows. And I'll tell you that guy we liked was Brett Whitefield. So people love your prospect takes. And it's funny, Brett, because a lot of times you really grind the tape. You really understand these things. You've got a real technical background when it comes to data. And a lot of times you're not completely in line with every other analyst this time of year when we're several months out. I remember when I first had you on, you flag planted JJ McCarthy. You were talking about Ricky Pearsall and how ecstatic you are for those guys. People were saying maybe you're a little higher on those guys than you should be. And then all of a sudden, everybody starts getting on that bandwagon. JJ ends up going 12th overall. Ricky Pearsall sneaks into the first round. So I think you've been really spot on. And a couple of years ago, you had some guy named Puka Nacua more highly ranked than the community did. So you had Puka pretty high that year. So I'll give you a big hat tip to that one. Everybody who's creating generational wealth for themselves in fantasy football and in Dynasty can maybe hit up Brett, ask for his Venmo or something like that. But let's get to it. Bird's eye view. 2025 class. We've had multiple impactful seasons from these rookie classes. It seems like more and more players enter the league and make immediate fantasy football impacts. How excited are you about this class in particular? Not necessarily compared to previous years, but just in general. Like, how hyped are you? Do you think this is an impactful year? Where are you at?
Yeah, so I think the general consensus around this draft is it's not a good class. I don't think that's necessarily true, and I say this all the time. Every class is a good class. There's always good players to find. The Puka class, for example, wasn't supposed to be great either. We found several guys late in that draft. Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think the year or two before that was a bad draft as well. We got Amon-Ra in the fourth round. There's always guys to be had. This draft, I think, is fine. It's stronger on the defensive side of the ball, no doubt. It's, you're weak at certain positions like quarterback and maybe wide receiver, but you're loaded at other positions like running back this year, for example, Theo. Awesome. I mean, it's absolutely stacked. We could debate running backs in this class for probably the whole episode if we wanted to, but it's an awesome class. So you're going to find gold in this class no matter what. I'm pretty confident we'll identify the right guys for people to draft.
Yeah, I agree with you. The running backs really do dominate. I did a mock draft with Cody Carpentier on Dynasty Life. Highly recommend you check that one out as well. But as you can expect, we did a single QB draft, and running backs really dominated that first round. Running back, I think this is one where people know that this is a special group, Brett. If you had to pick a second position that kind of gets you going, which would it be? And not necessarily, even if there's a kind of a gap between the talent at running back, but fantasy-wise, when it comes to wide receiver, tight end, quarterback, which one are you kind of most excited about when you're doing your early evaluation processes?
It'd have to be tight end. I mean, well, other than D-line, I'm a D-line guy, but we're not here to discuss Hawk Mollies, right?
We're not an IDP show. I want to be very clear to everybody about that. We'll get your opinion on. I'll pick your brain on one defensive question. Shout out to you IDP people out there, but this is not for you guys.
Yeah. Tight end, though. If I got to go with a secondary position here, tight end is loaded. Might be just as good as the running back class. It's just they're not going to get the premium capital I think you see the running backs get. But, man, this tight end class is absolutely stacked. I think there's going to be, 5, 6, 7 guys maybe that have really high draft grades from me. Really good class across the board. It's a flavored thing, too. Like, if you want your yak studs, we got those. You want your route runners, we got those. You want your big physical at the catch guys, we got those. If you want your inline tight ends that can go block and stretch the seam, we got those guys. So I mean, it's a really good class for tight end. The NFL, especially for the NFL, but also for you dynasty guys.
No, for sure. I'm super stoked about the tight end class. That was another where we did a 2-round single QB draft, Cody and I, and 4 tight ends were in our top 24 in single QB, which I think is going to be pretty much in line. And there's a possibility that another tight end could kind of push himself into that mix as well. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to hear a word from the FFPC. And if you got eliminated from your playoff contest last week, FFPC is doing a secondary contest this week. So go and get your money back. When we return, Brett and I are going to look at some of the top players in the class. We're also going to get Brett's positional, tiered ranking. We're going to go through the top 25 ranking. I'm going to attempt to keep up with Brett, and we're going to go from there. We'll see you in 1 minute.
Hey, why do we partner with the FFPC? Because they have the widest variety of fantasy football formats, and it's the easiest place to find all types of fantasy football contests in the world. What if you want to play for high stakes? Well, they have a $6 million prize pool with their Fantasy Players Championship. They also have way too early best ball leagues that start in February and Dynasty leagues. They have the closest thing to a liquid market for orphans that there is in all of Dynasty. And the FFPC has sponsored us for half a decade because we are actually delivering information that can help fantasy gamers, and they're generating so much interest and bringing in so many new users, casual users even. The FFPC creates a unique experience where you can both compete against the best and make money. Use promo code UNDERWORLD to get $25 off your first team. $25 off your first team at the FFPC with promo code UNDERWORLD. Go get it!
And Brett, you're up in Michigan. You're a big Detroit Lions fan. How optimistic are you, not only about this weekend against Washington, but sort of a chance for your Lions to make a real run to the Super Bowl and potentially take it down?
Yeah, I feel pretty good. I think if they can handle business in the NFC, that Super Bowl matchup should be just S tier. Whether they get a Buffalo Bills rematch or a Ravens matchup or Chiefs, it's going to be the hardest game of the season no matter what. So I'm pretty excited, though. I would say 25% chance. So.
Yeah, no, I actually picked Detroit last week on press coverage with Alan Seslowski of RotoWire. I was a Buffalo Detroit Super Bowl has been sort of my prediction.
Yeah.
Close enough to one another as cities, and two fan bases absolutely starving for it. That would be a very entertaining one. But we have more important things to talk about than the NFL playoffs at this point. We got to talk about this rookie draft class. And everybody's sort of aware at this point of who Ashton Jeanty is. This is a guy that's become sort of famous. I said that the buildup, I had some pushback on this one, but for me, the like general public idea about Jeanty, I feel like he's right there with where Bijan was 2 years ago, where people know what he is. They're overly excited about him. This is one, like, it's a can't miss type player. I think that the Dynasty community is just head over heels. When we were doing like initial Dynasty rankings, including veterans, I think he's already in the top 3 or 4 running backs because of the trade equity that he has, because of the immediate value he's going to bring to your Dynasty team. I also think he's headed for the first round in redraft this year. What are your kind of like general ideas about him? Sort of where would you rank him historically versus the some of the best running backs to come out over the last few years?
Yeah, so I've been scoring prospects for 10 seasons now. So I have a database going back that far. Bijan Robinson was the best running back I've ever scored. And then Jahmyr Gibbs, for reference, was like number 6. And then I had a guy named Kenneth Walker III. I think he was down at like 10, 11. I think for me, Jeanty's going to be somewhere between Gibbs and Kenneth Walker III. And what's funny is play style wise, he's like a blend of those two guys as well. So I think that's kind of funny, but great prospect. In most years, he'd be the number 1 guy. Obviously, I'm not going to throw the generational tag on him, but he's worth every bit of the hype for sure. He's not quite on that Bijan level though for me.
Yeah, interesting. And your thoughts on him as a pass catcher, because this is one where the tape looked really good his junior year, and then this year he's able to run for like 200 yards a game. They completely got away from using him as a pass catcher out of the backfield, but the guy caught, I believe, 39 passes 2 seasons ago, which is a solid number by all metrics. It looks good catching the ball. Sort of your thoughts on him as a two-way back at the next level?
Yeah, I have no concerns about that at all. His, the 23 tape is great as far as pass catching goes. The route running looks smooth. The thing with college running back pass production profiles too is they're not really asked to do anything. Like go back to Travis Etienne's senior year at Clemson. It's like, yeah, he caught 1 million balls and he went back to school to prove he could do it, but like everything he did was like a flare route or just a backfield out. Like there was no pizzazz to that. But people, elevated him in their draft rankings because he caught however many balls it was. So it's tough to really gauge. I think you have to look at the movement skills Jeanty has and then measure the hand strength. And I think both those things check out. So I have no issues with him as a pass catcher at the next level.
Now, we've had some great success. It used to be years back, it would be sort of cheat code for redraft managers to draft rookie wide receivers because people had a little bit of fear of a year one player stepping in, commanding a high number of targets and producing and entering our starting lineups. Now the entire like circle has turned where last year we saw incredible enthusiasm surrounding Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors. Both of those guys were not only in Fuego in Dynasty and early startups, but both of those guys were both the highest drafted wide receiver of all time in redraft. So the market's turned. We've actually had 4 out of the last 5 seasons, you've had a top 6 scorer in PPR at the wide receiver spot that it was a rookie. Talking about guys like Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Puka Nacua, and then this year where Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik Neighbors were right there in the scoring, and Ladd McConkey for what it's worth, he snuck in right around the wide receiver 1 line as well. If there was a player this year to finish as a top 6 scorer at the wide receiver position, who would it be and what landing spot would it be?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I got to go Tet McMillan. I think he's the only S tier wide receiver prospect in this class to me. You're going to get a guy who's on that Mike Evans, Drake London spectrum. I don't think he's quite as explosive as Evans when he was coming out, but he's a little bit more explosive than Drake London, perhaps. Very refined route runner, great ball skills, awesome after the catch, kind of does everything you want out of a X alpha type wide receiver. So I think I'd have to go with him. Landing spot wise, I mean, New England's the low hanging fruit there.
That's the one.
Yeah, if he lands in New England, I mean, giving Drake, the problem is they need offensive line help badly, but yeah, I think that's the spot for sure. They don't have any. There'd be no target competition for him. So
yeah, I mean, I love McMillan. We've talked about McMillan as well for pretty much all season long. Yeah. I've loved your sort of I think that was a Brett Whitefield one, a twitchier Drake London.
Yeah.
Was that okay? So that's your one, and I've been using that as well because I think that's sort of the best way to describe him. I think when people hear about a 6'5", let's call him 212, 215, like looks the part type wide receiver, and he's very much in that 6'5" range. I'd be shocked if he's not 6'4". I think he's very tall. This is a guy where when you hear that size, you think, okay, this is an outside wide receiver. This is a guy that's going to score on touchdowns. This is a guy I'm excited about. But I think when you watch Tet McMillan, he's different than that. He's a guy that an offensive coordinator might say, we can target this guy 145 times as a rookie. He's a target earner. This is a guy who you can move around. You can play him in the slot if you want to get a matchup that's advantageous. I think for me, it's like Tet McMillan is a different kind of 6'5", 212 than we've seen in previous seasons, where I think there's been a little bit of trepidation even in embracing bigger wide receivers because we had so many smaller guys hitting. Brian Thomas Jr. last year, obviously the exception to the rule, but I think Tet McMillan's going to step in. If he gets that landing spot in a place like New England, even Carolina for that matter, at 8, I think this is a guy who's going to immediately be a wide receiver 1 in terms of usage, and whether that translates into immediate wide receiver 1 in terms of fantasy scoring remains to be seen. But he's really, really good, and I'm really excited to see that one. Let's pivot over here, Brett, because there's a lot of stuff to talk about. But one position that I continually am excited about is the tight end position, and you're not the only smart person saying this is sort of a transformative class in terms of depth of tight ends coming into it, guys that look like future NFL starters. But let's take it a step further. This is a copycat league where we see NFL teams try to emulate previous year's success. Do you think this is going to drive the higher end tight ends in this class up further when we look at the success of Sam Laporta in 2023 and then guys like Trey McBride and Brock Bowers this year with just an absurd amount of catches, an absurd amount of targets? You actually had McBride and Bowers, who are now third and fourth all time in most catches in a season, and they both did it last year. Do you think this sort of elevates guys like Tyler Warren, Colston Loveland, Harold Fannin Jr., where NFL teams might say, I'm willing to push these guys up my board a little bit because I want to see if I can get a lot out of them right away? Or is that sort of a dangerous way of thinking for fantasy managers?
No, I don't think it's dangerous at all. I think what you see at the college level is a game that's preparing guys for this moment. There used to be this lag where a tight end would get drafted and you wouldn't get production out of him for a few years. Well, that's obviously changed. And like even Trey McBride, to an extent, was ready to go when he came in the league. It took him a little time because he's playing behind Zach Ertz, but he was ready to go. His Senior Bowl performance, for example, was insane. So, yeah, I mean, these guys are coming in as defined, developed route runners, the hands, the body control. I think teams are looking to mimic what's going on. It is a copycat league. There's a lot of, the other thing too is these guys are legitimately skillful. It's not just that the trend in the NFL is that these guys should go higher. Their profiles suggest they should go high because they're awesome players. So I think it's both.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll cover these tight ends a bit, but let's sort of get your top tight end in this class. And just to kind of piggyback on what you said with the elite production, it's a very odd, but this year, the two leading receivers in the country in terms of receptions were both tight ends. And then actually the fifth overall receiving leader was a tight end as well. You never see this in college football. So I think like, college football, these sort of guys are coming out a little bit more frequently. I think another thing, Brett, we actually talked about this last offseason. It's easier to emulate the Sam Laporta, Trey McBride, Brock Bowers type size where they're sort of an overgrown wide receiver and they're not like a Jimmy Graham. There was a whole, let's find these Jimmy Graham type, Rob Gronkowski size guys. Those guys are few and far between when it comes to elite ball skills, elite route running. But the 6'4", 249 guy, I can find that guy quite often. So I think that's also kind of played into it. Do you agree with that a little bit?
Totally agree. And I'm tired of reading write-ups from people saying Tyler Warren's too small or Colston Loveland's too small. That's the modern NFL tight end. All of them. Trey McBride, Brock Bowers, Sam Laporta, Dalton Kincaid. They're all the same size.
Evan Ingram.
They're all right in line with where Warren, Colston Loveland, Harold Fannin Jr., I'm forgetting one here. Gunnar Helm. All these guys are about the same size. So, yeah.
Who on earth is saying Tyler Warren is too small? Tyler Warren is a beast.
He's the biggest of the bunch for sure. But the other guys, they're getting that criticism for sure.
Now, when you look at the tight end class, does one particular player stand out to you a lot, or is it I could see maybe two or three guys get to the tight end one overall spot?
Yeah, I'm going to be a fence sitter here because I really like Tyler Warren and I really like Colston Loveland, and they offer slightly different things. If you go back 2 years to that Sam Laporta class, Tyler Warren to me is the Sam Laporta of this class, where Colston Loveland is more of a Dalton Kincaid. I think he's a better athlete than Dalton Kincaid, but both of those tight ends have had a lot of success already, and they remind me a lot of each other. That's my working comp for both of them. So Tyler Warren, I mean, really good route runner, just insane body control and catch point prowess for a tight end. Just kind of uncanny, actually. I don't know if there's a guy in the NFL doing it quite like that right now at the tight end position. Maybe Hawk. And then Colston Loveland, just a really good route runner. He's basically a wide receiver out there running routes, which is kind of how I view Dalton Kincaid. He's kind of like a big slot receiver. Both those guys are just awesome, and they do slightly different things. I think Warren might be a little better after the catch than Loveland. He plays angry. He's got this angry vibe to him where he's thrashing dudes. So I really like both those guys. I think they're, cream of the crop. They should both be first-round picks.
Yeah, I think they'll both be top 20 when it's all said and done. They both have very interesting stories where you think there maybe is a little bit more development with them as well. Like Loveland came to Michigan from Idaho. How many guys, Brett, in the history of the Michigan program have came from that region of the country and made this much of an impact? So Loveland comes from Idaho. gets on the field as a freshman, led Michigan in receiving categories on a bad Michigan offense this year. But I think what's interesting is if we go back a year, he only had about 45 receptions, but he was right there with Roman Wilson in terms of total receptions for the year. So this is a guy that really helped them win the national title. Stud, absolute stud. Agree with you, athletic as well. And Warren, this guy was a quarterback. And what's interesting about Warren is Warren sets all these records, and they still use him on manufactured touches as a runner. They're trying to get the ball in his hands at an exceedingly high rate. He's the best Penn State tight end we've ever seen. And we've seen so many of these guys. Like Theo Johnson was pretty good last year, but you've seen multiple guys go on day 2 out of this program. Warren, I think, is just going to break the mold. And I think for me, Warren's my tight end 1 because I think he can handle the highest target share right out the gate. I think NFL teams are going to look at him. He's got that sort of mini Gronk type size. I think he's 6'6". And I think that he's really, really good. But Loveland as well, like he could land correctly. Loveland lands with Jim Harbaugh in LA. I think we're standing on our head. So I love that with that class. We're nearing the Senior Bowl. We're both going to be there. Senior Bowl coverage is going to come really at you next week. People are going to get ramped up for this. And obviously, a few days before the actual game, you're going to read countless articles. Let's get ahead of the curve here. Every single year, there's guys that go to the Senior Bowl, and they rise up considerably. It's sort of like the draft starts in Mobile is absolutely a true thing. Last year, even like Bo Nix, Michael Penix, both there at the quarterback spot, multiple wide receivers, Ricky Pearsall, Roman Wilson, tons of guys, just Marshawn Lloyd, guys to like solidify their draft capital in Mobile and separate themselves from the field. If you had to pick a player or two for people to keep an eye on that you're kind of most excited to see with sort of guys that could rise up, who would they be, Brett?
You're gonna make me stick to 2. I got like 5.
Well, listen, you rip off 5 if you want, but keep a little gas in the tank. You want to keep a little. And let's remind everybody. This is a good opportunity. Remind everyone where they can find your content right now.
Yeah, fantasypoints.com, data.fantasypoints. That is my baby. The data suite. It's the best consumer-facing product out there for data. If you like data and how it pertains to football, data.fantasypoints.com. That's a spot. Then also, NFL First Read is my podcast. I co-host it with Joe Marino. Tuesdays and Thursdays every week will be, the draft content we have planned is insane. So that's on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, doesn't matter. NFL First Read. Subscribe to that. You will not be disappointed. We have a lot of fun debates on there too. So
yeah, highly recommend that. And my show with Scott Barrett, you can also find over at Fantasy Points. It's called School of Scott. But Brett, let's go back to Mobile. We'll cap you out at 3. Save a little gas in the tank for your podcast.
All right, we'll go. First guy I gotta plant the flag on is Jackson Dart, QB Ole Miss. This dude is awesome. He's my QB2 in the class, actually. Really like everything he does from a quarterback centric standpoint. Really good footwork, nice throwing mechanics, accurate downfield passer. We talked about him preseason, I believe, Theo.
Yes,
on your show.
Well, you talked about him even a year ago because I asked you for a quarterback sort of to look out for this year, and you've been flag planting Dart for a long time. I love that.
Yeah, and if you were into Jaden Daniels' skill set coming out, Jackson Dart is very similar, especially in the offense he's coming from. Not as athletic, obviously. He's not going to rack up 1,000 yards rushing in the NFL, but really mobile guy, super good athlete, and then just the downfield accuracy and throwing. I think he's really going to shine in Mobile because of those types of drills are just made for a quarterback like that.
I love it. I think Dart, for me, this is the QB3 for me in the class, and I think that if there is a third quarterback that makes it into the first round, it's Dart. And there's multiple teams you could see sort of saying, we really need to push it at quarterback. This is a guy where he's got the swag, makes big throws, interesting backstory, and there seems like there's a little bit of steam where the NFL community might like him a little bit more than the Dynasty community right now. Yeah. There's been some rumors recently that he could be in consideration if the Raiders stick at 6 and the other 2 quarterbacks are gone, that he could go up as high as that. I don't necessarily see him going there, but I do think at the end of the day, he'll be a first-round draft pick.
Yeah, I think QB's always the media's behind where the NFL sees the QBs, and I think there's if I had to bet right now, I would bet money that Jackson Dart is a top 15 pick, just like I was willing to do that with JJ last year. So he's not that level of prospect for me, but I think he's a top 15 player in this draft for sure.
No, for sure. And who else? Is there anybody else at some other positions or
Yeah.
stick? Okay,
Yeah,
go
let's
for
go.
it.
Jaden Higgins, wide receiver, Iowa State. Love this dude. Big body, 6'2", thick, great route runner. Like unbelievable route runner for the size. Kind of was, he's the perfect candidate for a Senior Bowl breakout too. Because I think about Terry McLaurin coming out of Ohio State, where what he was asked to do at Ohio State was never going to match what he was asked to do in the NFL. And he got to go to Mobile, and this is my favorite anecdote story to tell as well. He went to Mobile and put on an absolute route running clinic. And he never ran routes at Ohio State. He was a gadget guy, fly sweep, screen merchant. Oh, I hate the term merchant, and then occasional go ball. Jaden Higgins used kind of weird at Iowa State. He's going to come into Mobile and he's going to route dudes up, and people are going to be shocked, similar to how, Ricky Pearsall came in last year and just routed dudes up. I mean, that's Senior Bowl has Higgins written all over it. Gunnar Helm, Texas tight end, is the other one. Guy, I've already mentioned him once in this conversation, but he is a dog. Talk about yak machine. You want to scheme up some throws. When I was watching Jatavian Sanders last year and Adonai Mitchell and Xavier Worthy, Gunnar Helm kept popping off the tape for me. I was texting Scott, a year ago to the date, man. Like, remember the name Gunnar Helm for next year. He's going to be awesome in the next class. He's got a real shot to be a high second round pick, I think. So I think all three of those guys will shine.
I love the Helm call. We love that play the other day when it was the Texas game, and he actually stiff armed the hell out of Downs, and then got the 15-yard penalty. It was a really soft penalty, I thought. But yeah, he's been a guy that's sort of standing out. I like him a lot. I have him as my tight end 5 in this class. But yeah, I think it's going to be a year where you see 5-6 tight ends inside of like the top 55 picks. So good place to be. I'll add, for me, the guy that I'm sort of most excited to see in person is Harold Fannin Jr. So
I left him off for you because you told me to leave a guy off.
I really appreciate that. I'll give you the assist on that one. But for me, it's like Harold Fannin Jr. I was just watching like a number of his highlight films because I'm trying to gauge just how fast he is. When these guys are in the MAC, sometimes it looks like they're sort of running away from people, but they're playing against guys who are not necessarily Sunday players. But what Fannin was able to do against Penn State and Texas A&M this year, where he went for about 140 yards in both games, had 8 catches and 11 catches, caught a touchdown in both. The Bowling Green game, everyone saw sort of the strength of this Penn State defense in the college football playoff. This is a team where they were loaded with Sunday players on Penn State, and Fannin Jr. Just ripped them to shreds. Even in the first drive for Bowling Green, he caught the touchdown, caught a big pass down the seam. And this is a guy where when you talk about 117 receptions, 1,500 receiving yards, it's just silly numbers. So for me, I think Fannin Jr., he's my tight end 3 in the class, but I think some NFL team might fall in love with him if he has a huge week in Mobile. Then I'm looking at the wide receiver spot. There's a bunch of guys who I think could kind of separate themselves. I don't think this is a fantastic class. So I think there's going to be 1 or 2 guys sort of that'll have an exceptional amount of steam this year coming out. We've talked about Elick Ayamaner from Stanford several times over. Ayamaner. I went over this Cody Carpentier. Well, it's a name that's going to be largely mispronounced throughout the process. But Stanford was so bad. But this guy checks off so many boxes. I know you're very high on him, but 6'2", 210. When we talked about how great a player Travis Hunter was, this is a player like where he shredded Colorado 2 seasons ago. And there hasn't been that many opportunities for high-end production, I think because of the team he was on more so than anything else. I think he's going to make a big play. And then I think Jalen Royals from Utah State could be another guy, Brett. We've seen this for back-to-back seasons, sort of a G5 guy go on day 2, Malik Corley last year, and 2 seasons ago, Rashee Rice when SMU was in the American. I think Royals could do that this year. Your brief thoughts on the 3 guys I mentioned.
Yeah, starting with Ayu Minor, he's awesome. He's my wide receiver 2 in the class. Like, he is absolutely my dude. I totally agree. Another one I left out just so we could get to him later. Here's the thing with the Senior Bowl wide receiver class. Because this is perceived as a weaker draft class, we don't have, after Tet, there's no clear-cut order that these guys are going to go in. And every year, I like the last 5 years, the Senior Bowl dudes all elevate themselves, whether it's Puka or Rashi Rice or Jaden Reed, Christian Watson. These guys go from being relatively unknown to being day 2 picks. And you're going to see a bunch of that happen this year where a Jalen Royals might show up to Mobile and tear it up. And next thing you know, we're talking about this guy in, back into round 2, early round 3, where, the casual fan doesn't have any idea who Jalen Royals is. You know what I mean? I think there's a lot of guys in Mobile like that. Who was the other one you mentioned?
Harold Fannin Jr.
Oh yeah, Fannin Jr. is awesome. You mentioned the trying to gauge speed against subpar competition. It is tough, but the movement skills when he has the ball in his hands are just like, oh my goodness, this guy is going to be a phenomenal route runner. And then on top of that, it's Bowling Green. Even though he's not playing against top tier competition, everyone he plays against knows that guy's getting the ball on this play, and they can't stop. No one can stop it. I mean, how many catches do you have this year, Theo? It was like
117. And the year before, this is a guy where a year ago, it was sort of like the Mel Kiper types were talking about him because he had over 1,000 yards, 75 catches last year. So it's not a one-year wonder. He just looks phenomenal. And just, the Texas A&M, if you have sort of apprehension about this profile, just pop in the Penn State, pop in the Texas A&M highlights. Those are Sunday players. There's going to be a number of players drafted defensively from both of those schools. And Fannin Jr., he was tearing them up. And he's got a diverse route tree. He sort of looks like an overgrown wide receiver, a lot of what we were talking about and sort of the trend of the NFL. So Fannin Jr. I just love as well. But keep going.
I was saying another thing I like about Fannin Jr. is the alignment diversity he brings. It reminds me a little bit of Trey McBride coming out of Colorado State, where it's like he's playing inline half the time. So we can check that box, right? But then when they need that third and a long conversion, they're going slot, wide, backfield, all over them. They're getting him the matchups he needs, and he's crushing it. He's beating corners and safeties, and it's awesome. I love Fannin Jr.
No, for sure. This is a really, really fun one. We're going to have a lot more Senior Bowl coverage. Let's take one more sort of question. You've been flag planting guys early. Is there any other player that you sort of want? I know you talked about Dart. You've talked about a number of guys. Is there sort of another flag plant where you want to put your stamp on this guy early that you think is going to rise up in terms of NFL draft capital?
The guy I already mentioned him. Unfortunately, I wrote him down for this. It was Alec Ayumanor from Stanford.
Love it.
I can't see a world, knowing how the NFL grades wide receivers, knowing how I grade wide receivers, I can't see a world he's not a top 20 pick.
I said top 40 on another show, and they said that I was getting a little bold, and I don't think that's bold at all. But you're the bold one.
Yeah, I'm bold as hell on this. I maybe top 25. I think he's a first round pick though. I'll just say I can't see a world where this dude's not a first round pick. He has literally every trait NFL teams look for in a wide receiver. He lacks nothing. Not athleticism, size, skill. He doesn't lack anything. I don't know. I think he might be the BTJ of this class, where it's like he's kind of an afterthought because the top 3 are so good. It's like I think he slides comfortably into the first round here. So that's my big flag plant.
That is a massive flag plant. Wide receiver 2 is a massive flag plant. We'll wait. Let's get started on these tiers, because I think that the conversation with why is this player not wide receiver 2 in your rankings will sort of come up when you list your tiers. So I'll say for me, I'll go tier 1 for me is by himself Ashton Jeanty, because I think this is a guy where no matter what your format is, I want to see him as the number 1 pick. If you play Superflex, take him number 1. If you play single QB, take him number 1. If you're looking to get an edge in early best ball drafts, he's obviously the guy you want to draft. And I think that if it's one of those things, just like with Bijan Robinson, even if you want to zig while there's zag and you don't want to take him, then trade the pick. He's the guy. It's doesn't have to be a complicated game, Brett.
Yeah. My tier 1 is 2 guys. Maybe it should only be 1. Ashton is number 1, obviously. So I fully agree there. Even the value you talked about with the trade, I mean, that's why he's the first overall pick, because you can trade him for a king's ransom at this point. And then I like Shedeur Sanders in that tier as well. I know I'm higher on Shedeur than most. He's probably my QB crush. I call him Shedeuro because he reminds me of Joe Burrow. So we're going with Shedeuro that's how I will refer to him the entire draft process. The dude is awesome. I think he's really great. I think he's clearly the top quarterback in this class to me. And if you're playing in Superflex league, so by the way, that's the caveat here is I play Superflex. So I did my tiers based on Superflex tight end premium. So Shedeur in that top tier because I think, you're getting a day one starter and a guy who's going to be really good as a pro.
I love it. And for me, this is one where he's in my tier 2. So for me, my tier 2 is Ted McMillan, Shedeur Sanders, and then Cam Ward. I put all three of those guys in there. Cam Ward, I'm higher on than you are. So we'll wait to see where you rank him to sort of see your thoughts on him. But I think Ward's going to get the draft capital. I think he's plenty athletic, not where he's going to be a guy you're getting, a lot of design runs for, but I think that can give you enough as an opportunistic scrambler. Yeah. And some of the throws he makes are just absurd, Brett. Like the arm talent is there. And I do think that this is a guy that's going to go inside of the top 10 overall picks. We both talked about Ted McMillan. I think he's a foundational piece for your dynasty roster. And if you're looking to get an edge in early best ball drafts, maybe you don't play dynasty, Ted McMillan's the one where we both would bet on to have the biggest fantasy impact in 2025 without knowing the landing spot. So that's sort of my next tier. Who would be in your tier 2?
So my tier 2 is 7 guys deep. I do have Cam Ward in that tier because like you said, I like Jackson Dart better than Cam Ward. However, I do think Cam Ward's there's a good chance he gets higher draft capital. I also agree with the playmaking aspect. Like he's not going to be a heavy design run guy, but I think he can give you 300-400 yards rushing on scrambles. He's going to probably be a great runner in the red zone and rack up touchdowns year over year. I have concerns with his overall play. I think he's got the Caleb Williams gene where he's not processing anything. He's going to take a lot of risks. The pressure to sack ratio is going to be egregious. We're going to chart him for, he's going to take 25 sacks on his own accord, as a rookie probably because he's like, that's how he plays. But as far as talent goes, raw talent, probably not a more talented dude in this draft than Cam Ward. So I will concede that to you for sure. And that reason I have him 6th overall in my second tier. I have Tet at 3. I have Caleb Johnson 4. Running back from Iowa, and I'm sure he's in your next tier
for sure.
And then at 5, I have Omarion Hampton, running back from North Carolina. With Caleb Johnson, he checks 2 of the premium traits for me: burst and vision. He's also kind of hard to take down. His forced missed tackle rate is okay. I think you see some limitations there. He's going to play physical, but he doesn't have a go-to move to make guys miss. But the burst and vision is incredible. You put him in a zone scheme, I think he thrives. So I love Caleb Johnson. Omarion Hampton, contact balance, physical. He's a finisher. He's reminds me a lot of David Montgomery. I think he has enough juice to hit explosives in the NFL, but ultimately it's going to be your early down, grind it out kind of runner, and he's really good at that role.
How many players are you at now in the 2 tiers, Brett? I'm trying to keep track of it. We'll make sure we put it in the show description, guys. But how many are you at now?
So Hampton was 5, and then I have Cam Ward 6, so I kind of went to Cam Ward, then backtracked to fill in the gap. So Cam Ward is 6, and then I have 3 more in this tier.
So for me, my next tier will be all running backs. It's Omarion Hampton. I have a slight edge of Hampton to Caleb Johnson, but it could flip-flop. They're both awesome. I think one of those guys could sneak into the first round of the NFL draft. If you had to bet on a non-Ashton Jeanty running back going in the first round, would it be Johnson, Brett?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, so for me, it's Hampton, Caleb Johnson, and I'll push Quinshon Judkins up here. And I've heard a couple of your takes on him where I know that you have some question marks about the vision. I think some of that is he wants to take on defenders and he wants to knock them over at times. But I do think all 3 of these guys, prototypical size. These guys are all 6 feet tall. They're all 220, 215, maybe 225, depending on how they weigh in at the combine. All 3 of these guys are NFL starting running backs. Correct. All 3 of these guys, I think the ranking could switch based on the landing spot. Now, Judkins, to me, I could have put in the next tier. I think that I prefer Hampton and I could prefer Caleb Johnson. But at the end of the day, I think we have a little bit of prospect fatigue when it comes to Judkins. This is a guy who had the 2nd most rushing yardage in SEC history as a freshman behind Herschel Walker. 3 straight seasons with at least 12 rushing scores. This guy's a beast. And at the end of the day, I think he can handle volume. and I think he'll be a starting running back maybe as soon as his rookie season. So I sort of pushed him into this range. What about your? Oh, I'm sorry. Go. Any comments on these guys? I'm sure you're going to cover them in sort of your next Judkins in your next year, maybe.
Yeah. So as far as Caleb and Amarian go, I think there's a chance they both go in the first round. By the way,
I had that in my mock draft. I had Johnson going to the Chargers, and I had Hampton sneaking in with the Minnesota Vikings, which I think would be an awesome spot.
Okay, you know what's crazy? I think I prefer them flipped. I like Hampton in the gap counter power scheme in LA, and I like Johnson in the zone scheme in Minnesota. But anyways,
any way to get him in the first round, we're smiling as fantasy managers.
Heck yeah. So I do have Judkins 7th. So after Cam Ward, I have Judkins 7th to kind of in the middle of the second tier for me, which I guess is the third tier for you. Yeah, you nailed it with Judkins. He's awesome. There's definitely prospect fatigue for him. I think him switching schools probably weirded some people out because he was performing so well. Ole Miss, he was did I say that right? Yeah, Ole Miss, right?
Yeah, Ole Miss.
Oh gosh, totally just brain farted. And then for whatever reason, he jumped ship to go to Ohio State. When he was playing in a legit machine at Ole Miss. So
there's a good story with that one. Ole Miss, this year one, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but it's a cool one. I know you'll appreciate these NIL stories. But year one, Judkins, there was a ton of interest with him transferring because he just set the world on fire. And Ole Miss collective got it together, and they gave Judkins essentially a huge raise. Okay, so then he repeats in year two, where year two, the guy goes and gets another season where he's got like 15 rushing touchdowns, 1,100 rushing yards. Yeah. And he says, yo, guys, like we want to, let's renegotiate. And at the end of the day, Ole Miss, the collective, changed their approach, and they went out and got all these guys like Trey Harris, and they wanted to spread the wealth instead of consolidating it to a running back. So it's very much like the NFL a little bit with running backs don't matter. So got to go to Columbus and get that big check, Brett.
Yeah, Columbus had like a payroll of $40 million this year, so we're
nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, so Judkins is great. So he's 7th overall, and then to round out this tier, I got the 2 tight ends, Colston Loveland and Tyler Warren. Don't care what order you throw them in. At the end of the day, I'll judge that when they get their draft capital assignments or fits, landing spots. They're both great prospects. Both should be top 20 players. So that rounds out that second tier for me.
I love that, and that's one where I had pushed Warren up to 8 overall in my rankings, but we're in single QB. But it looks like we're sort of in line with everything when it comes to Warren. I'm a slightly lower on Loveland. My next tier would be, so I guess this would be my 8 overall, would be, and this ranking could kind of move around, but it's really Luther Burden, it's Travion Henderson, it's Jackson Dart, and it's Tyler Warren. I think when it comes to Burden, I know that you don't have him quite as high, but I think he's going to get the draft capital. This is a guy where we've seen him have an 80 catch, 1,200 yard season in the SEC. This year he regressed. We hate to see that, but at the end of the day, I think he's going to end up being drafted somewhere inside of the top 18 picks in the NFL draft. I think this is a player that if he lands correctly, there's a little bit of DJ Moore to him. There's certainly some Debo to him if a team wants to use him correctly. And now I understand the profile is not perfect, but I do value him as the wide receiver 2 in the class. Travion Henderson, we talked about him before. I think this is a guy where he's going to be around a round 2 pick. And I think that this is a guy we've already seen him thrive in sort of a running back by committee alongside Judkins. He's got explosiveness, compares favorably to like a J.K. Dobbins. I think his floor would be like a higher usage Jalen Warren in a good way. Warren gave us that running back 2 season. Warren just happens to be in a split backfield with Najee Harris. But I think Travion Henderson, I understand he's had some foot injuries and all that sort of thing, but I think this is a guy that's going to put fantasy points up, be a continual kind of RB2 for us. Jackson Dart goes in there for me as well. All the stuff you talked about him, I just don't have him as highly as the other guys, but I'm totally open to pushing him up as high as tier 2. And then for me, Tyler Warren comes in at, I guess, number 11 overall. Your thoughts on that?
So you had Dart at 10?
Yeah, it's sort of I could have Dart as high as 8. This tier is sort of fluid for me. Push comes to shove. If I had to pick one guy that I could have the most exposure to on my Dynasty rosters, it's going to be Tyler Warren. I want to walk away with max exposure to him. But the other guys as well, like Dart, I think he's going to get the draft capital. I think he's good. And for me, it's a significant teardrop down to quarterback 4 from him. So if you want to push him up because of your needs, go for it. And then Burden and Henderson, I just like those guys.
So this is funny because it just shows you my, not being a fantasy guy, because I'm as bullish on Dart as you'll find as anyone, and I have him lower than you in my fantasy rankings. So that's funny. I have Dart at 12. So my next year it gets interesting. So we rounded out tier 2 at pick 9 with Judkins. My next tier is the wide receiver / Dart tier. So that next tier is my guy Alec Umanor, Stanford. I have Emeka Egbuka in there, which is funny because you and I have talked about him, and I've never said anything good about him to you. But I have him this high because it turns out I just don't really like this wide receiver class a ton. So he ended up being right in the mix, despite me not loving his game. He's Rashee Rice 2.0. If you like what Rashee does.
When you say that, though, like I've heard this one where you go, I don't like him, but he's Rashee Rice 2.0. You're going to elevate him by telling everybody who plays fantasy football that he's Rashee Rice 2.0.
Yeah, some of that is my brain being weird. So like sometimes I argue with myself. So like the hype on Emeka Egbuka, I guess when I watched tape, it didn't match it. So I'm like, oh, I don't like him. But I do, because I loved Rashee as a prospect, but I loved Rashee as a prospect versus what the consensus was. I had Rashee as a top 40 player in his class. I mocked him in the first round. And he's been fine. So yeah, I agree though. Emeka just reminds me so much of Rashee. He's going to dominate the short part of the field. Just an absolute effort to bring down after the catch. So love him. So now we're at what pick? We're at 12. I got Xavier Restrepo, wide receiver, Miami. Some Ricky Pearsall vibes. Great route runner. Get it done. Wide receiver. Red zone prowess. I love everything about Restrepo. I'm higher on him than Burden. And then at 13, I have Jackson Dart, quarterback. And then at 14, I have Luther Burden, wide receiver, Missouri. I don't really like Burden. I do agree on draft capital. I think a team will bite on him early. I hate adjusting my dynasty rankings based on that, but it does matter. And, I think Burden, how tall is Burden, by the way? 5'10"?
5'10", 5'11". I'll give him 5'10", but he's not, people saying that he's like really, really short. He is sort of like a well-built guy where he's going to give you that 5'10", let's call him 205.
He looks like a running back, not a wide receiver.
Yeah.
Is what I was thinking.
But I think that's sort of somewhat of a positive for the way that he plays. For me, it's like, I just think he looks different when he's on the field. Like when the ball gets in his hands, he's very dynamic. He can make defenders miss. I love the fact that he was a massive recruit that stayed in state. There's little things about him that it's a landing spot dependent thing. Like, and I'll tell you, the spot that a lot of people are mocking him to, I would not be a fan of him landing in Dallas, even though it would be 12th overall. He needs to play the slot. He needs to play the slot a considerable amount of time. And I don't see them bumping CeeDee Lamb out and around because they got, what works so well with CeeDee Lamb is he dominates in those slot snaps he gets. I don't think that would be ideal for Burden.
Yeah, the two spots I like him, I don't know that work either, just because the personnel they have, but that's Houston or Miami.
Houston works.
I don't know. Mechie's coming on a little bit, man, and he's slot only right now. So
yeah, I mean, maybe I need to adjust on Burden. Let us know in the comments what you think about Luther Burden.
For sure. Yeah, Burden definitely gadget guy. I guess that's where I see the value break for me. He's a gadget really only player. We're gonna scheme it up, get him yak opportunities. Those aren't first round players to me though. If the NFL takes him in the first round, to me that is absurd. That's like a Wan'Dale Robinson type gaff. So I don't. But he does have value as a yak player if he falls in the right spot for sure. So
yeah, and I guess we're caught up to your tier.
Yeah, I'm jumping now to my 4th tier, which would be the 15th player on my board.
Okay, so I guess I'm up to 12. I'm a little turned around here, trying to write down two things here. But so for me, Emeka Egbuka comes in at number 12. This is a guy where I think, a lot of the arguments you have where you're not excited, that actually makes me excited for fantasy though, Brett, because you're talking about traits that can correlate for us. I've heard some people, try to say, Chris Olave, they obviously love doing the in-school comparison, but I love players who have had to earn their targets alongside other NFL players, and no player in this class has had to do that more than Egbuka. Some of it's being there a long time, but there has to be some respect to a guy who's caught this many passes and had this many receiving yards for a program like Ohio State. If he hits his averages in the national title game, then he's going to break the school record for both receptions and for receiving yardage. And I think he's a big power slot. These kind of guys, if they get in the right situation, this can be continual seasons of wide receiver 2 production. I don't think he's got the immense ceiling, but I do think he's got a really, really solid floor for us in fantasy. And pretty much all these guys have hit out of Ohio State. There's been some disappointments, but none of them have completely busted over the last few years. I know Marvin Harrison Jr. didn't return the value at ADP, but nobody in their right mind would call him a bust. It took JSN a season, but he hit considerably. So we'll I know we're not judging the school here, but I think Ibuka is the next one that gives us at least some wide receiver 2 value. Colston Loveland for me, right behind him at 13 overall. And I think it's a really big week for him in Mobile. And I think this is a guy that looked awful against your Michigan Wolverines. But at the end of the day, if a team invests in Jalen Milroe somewhere in the top 40 picks in the draft, with his ability as a runner, then I think he's going to put up fantasy points. Now, do I think this is a guy that's a long-term stranglehold over an NFL starting job? No. But I think he can provide utility to us in fantasy if he gets the opportunity. Draft capital is going to say a lot about Milroe. If for whatever reason the NFL passes on him and he slides and slides and slides in the NFL draft, then this will be a profile that I'm going to stay away from. But right now, if we're projecting him to go somewhere inside of the top, let's say 45 picks, somewhere between pick 30 and pick 45, maybe a few picks before if a team wants to push him in the end of the first, then I'm there because I do think he has that scrambling ability, he has that speed, and that correlates to us in fantasy. Loveland, for all the reasons you've said, clean prospect. I love Fannin Jr., but I don't think he's going to be drafted as highly as Loveland, and that will matter. I also think Loveland is a beast as a blocker, so he'll be on the field pretty much the entire time when he gets to the NFL.
Nice. So you're up to 14 now?
No, I think we should have sent each other before. Yes, I'm at 14. 14.
Okay, cool. And if I would have sent you mine before, you would have told me that I had Jackson Dart on here twice, apparently. So
we're just vibing at this point. What number are you at right now, Brett?
So I'll go with my 15, but I don't have a top 25. I only have a 24 because I wrote Dart down twice like a doofus. So should we just rapid fire the rest of this real quick?
Yeah, let's rapid fire the rest.
All right, I'll go 16 through 24 right now. Dylan Sampson, running back, Tennessee. I think he's a far superior prospect to Jalen Wright. So big on him. Harold Fannin Jr., tight end, Bowling Green. We've talked about him a ton. Jaden Higgins, wide receiver, Iowa State. We talked about him a ton. Matthew Golden, wide receiver, Texas. That's a tier break for me there. And then I have wide receiver Jack Beck from TCU. Beck, he's another Senior Bowl guy that if he's healthy, I don't know if he's participating yet, but if he's healthy, he's going to tear up the Senior Bowl. Just his play style, big physical slot guy, big slot guy that can run routes, dude. So he will annihilate DBs in the one-on-ones. It's going to be fun. Travion Henderson, your guy from Ohio State. Next, Isaiah Bond, wide receiver, Texas. One of the most disappointing seasons I can imagine or remember was Isaiah Bond this year. There's questions. I got questions I need answered with him too. But Ty Felton, wide receiver, Maryland. Gunnar Helm, tight end, Texas. Trey Harris, wide receiver, Ole Miss. And then here's my surprise pick to round it out. Aronde Gadsden II, tight end, Syracuse.
So I love that one. And I'll say, tell us a little bit more about Beck, because this is one flying very much under the radar. TCU, and this is one where there's actually more buzz about the mega athlete Savion Williams right now. So you're absolutely flag planting Jack Beck.
Yeah. Gosh, it seems like every year we have, a guy who gets overlooked because he's not the best athlete. We've already mentioned them ad nauseum, right? Amon-Ra St. Brown, Puka Nacua, yada, yada. Jack Beck, man, he's right in that wheelhouse. He's a big, I don't know exactly how big he is. I know he played tight end at LSU before he transferred to TCU as a wide receiver. But he plays primarily in the slot. He will get some outside routes, but mostly slot guy. Just an absolute beast of a route runner for his size. It's ridiculous. And again, he's not going to blaze you with 4.4 speed. He's not going to go out there and stack a DB and crush him on a go route. That's not what he does. but the attention to detail in the route running, the whole route tree he runs from the slot, the two-way goes, the all the fun type of stuff your classic slot players run. He does that, but he does that at 6'4", 6'5", whatever he is. So really big guy, great after the catch, insane hands, got some of the best catches in college football last year. Insane volume too, right? He caught over 100 balls as well, did he not?
Yes, no, for sure.
Yeah. Really red zone prowess because he's got that big frame, good at the catch point. Really, the only thing he doesn't do super well is run very fast in a straight line. That's it.
Yeah, this is one where I'm really interested to see him. And I'm sure we'll talk about Savion Williams at some point, just because the athletic profile is wild. But let me round it out. I actually only got up to 23, so I'll pick a fun name for 24. Dylan Sampson at 15.
Nice.
I'm with you on Golden. I'm willing to push him even higher. Aya Manor right behind him, and then Isaiah Bond at Texas. So I have the two Texas wide receivers in there. Bond, I get it. There's some things there where we want to see maybe a little more production, but I do think he'll be one of the fastest wide receivers, fastest players in this draft class at the NFL Combine. The guy produced at two schools, and at the end of the day, I think the draft capital is going to be there with him. And he also was a bit banged up this year. Trey Harris right behind him. This is a profile where I could see him rising. I could also see him being a guy we want to pass on because of the landing spot. But at the end of the day, he had 1,000 receiving yards in only like 8 games in the SEC this year. This is a guy who transferred up from La Tech, and I think he's going to get the draft capital. Harold Fannin Jr. right there, and I'm willing to push Fannin Jr. up. Love him. Ollie Gordon, which is another one where we really want to see Ollie Gordon have a big-time Senior Bowl, and I think he needs to do it. This is a guy who's lost a ton of like steam from last season, but a big-time producer 2 seasons ago. Still had 13 rushing scores this year in a awful year for Oklahoma State. Damian Martinez, a guy we've talked about at Miami, where he produced at Oregon State. He's got the size, a guy who can handle volume. I gave a comparison you weren't like in love with, but I think he's like a rookie year Tyler Algier kind of level prospect, but could potentially have better draft capital. And we'll remember Algier gave us 1,000 rushing yards. He just happened to get Bijan Robinson. And then I'll put Woody Marks up in there just because I think he's such a good pass catcher. And this class lacks, a true pass catching running backs, a lot of two-way players, but I think Marks could step in there and make his impact in that way. And then I'm sort of lost here because 24 overall, I have about 8-9 guys I want to push in there.
Yeah.
So I will, just for the people, I'll put Cam Skattebo there just so we can get your opinion on Skattebo, Brett, because this is a guy that's polarizing right now. People want to know your opinion on him.
Yeah, there's a bunch of guys you mentioned that, every guy you just mentioned that I didn't have on my list, I think are potential risers. The Martinez guy, there's things I don't like about him, but I could see the NFL falling in love with a guy like that. Insanely tough runner. He's got really ridiculous bursts for his size. Big play hitter at 220. It's like, okay, sign me up for that. Kind of reminds me a little bit of the Florida State kid from last year, Trey Benson.
Yeah,
there's some similar vibes there. Skattebo, I don't really know what to make of him. I think a lot of his production profile is him forcing missed tackles against bad players. It's
Texas game though, Brett. He looked pretty good that one.
Yeah, he did. He did look good. I think you saw though the burst isn't quite there. And so it's scheme dependent for him. He's got to land in the right scheme. I'd be more willing to call him a Tyler Algier than Martinez for what it's worth. But yeah.
Love that. I know you got to get going. We said we're going to go 45. We're almost at an hour here because there's just too much fire when we pod together. Brett, let everybody know once again where they can find your work.
Yeah, I'm on fantasypoints.com. Data.fantasypoints.com is the data suite. And then my podcast, NFL First Read, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, wherever you listen to your podcast, you can get it there. Check it out. It's a great show in my opinion.
Yeah, no, it's a great show for sure. Check out any work that Brett puts out. It's absolute fire. Stick with us here at Press Coverage and Dynasty Life. Everything you need in this draft class, we've got you covered. We'll see you soon.